We're good to go.
Good afternoon, everyone. If you are on the East Coast, and if you're not, you are coming to us from a different time zone. We're really excited to have you joining us. My name is Kyra Jacobs. I'm with EPA Region 1, and I'm really excited today to be able to introduce you to three experts in Vermont who I have invited to have a really informal conversation with all of us today. So my first responsibility is to give you a quick overview of the National Source Water Collaborative. I've had the privilege of working with the National Source Water Collaborative for 20 years. And I think one of the most important things we do as a collaborative is provide education and opportunities to share how we do our work among all of our collaboratives and partners nationwide. Next slide, please. Thanks, Deirdre. So as you can see, we are we have a really strong bench. We have so many organizations, many of which are represented today. I wanted to call your attention to the fact that let's see, one person is not seeing the slides. Deirdre, are you able to try to help that person while I keep going? Can
Yes,
all the other presenters?
Yeah, I suggest you actually log out and then log back into the meeting to fix the problem.
Or sometimes I've noticed in recent meetings, if you click on the screen, that can help too. The joys of technology, it brings us closer together, but it can also be a bit challenging. So I wanted to point out to you that, as I said, we have a really strong bench. We have all these incredible partners across the country. And what I've noticed as a regional person is that as broad and diverse as our partners are, one of the challenges that we have is that sometimes when we try to go and implement all of this at the local level, there's that sort of missing link. So I love that we have a panel of folks doing this at the actual local level and state level. So again, I wanted to say that I started explaining that we have two new co-chairs of the National Source Water Collaborative. So next slide, please, Deirdre. So the current co-chairs are the National Rural Water Association, who is ably represented today by our state folks, both Liz Royer and Brad Roy. And this is all coincidence. We planned the webinar before I actually knew this. And then the American Waterworks Association. So David Laughlin represents National Rural Water Association as one of the two co-chairs. And the other co-chair is the American Waterworks Association, our colleague Adam Carpenter. So what's great is that both Vermont Rural Water Association and Ray Counter from Brandon Fire District are members of the American Waterworks Association. So I think that what I want to point out here is that all of this, it's like a tapestry. So the work that we do is interwoven among the different organizations that we belong to and those that we partner with. So again, for those of you just joining, my name is Kyra Jacobs. I'm the Source Water Protection Coordinator for EPA Region 1. I've been doing source water protection work since 2001, so 25 years, and I've been at EPA for 29. And for those of you who are not familiar with EPA regions, I'm based in Boston, and I work with the 6 New England states, which are Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. And because of the work that regional EPA staff do, and I want to underscore the importance of reaching out to your counterparts in the regional offices, we're here to help you build relationships with water utilities, folks like the National Rural Water Association staff, and many others represented as part of the collaborative. So in a moment, I'm going to have them turn on their cameras, but I just wanted to get through our little opening slide, and then we're not going to have slides. So it's a no slideshow webinar, which is sort of unique. Okay. And so I just wanted to remind you that got smiley face. No, this is not death by PowerPoint. This is excitement by learning live from people that actually do the work every day. So we just wanted to make sure you knew that the webinar will be recorded and it will be posted on the SourceWater Collaborative website under the resources and webinars groundwater section. And for those of you who don't know, we have a groundwater discussion group, and so it's led by Sylvia Mom, who's on the webinar today. And I just want to thank both the Groundwater Protection Council and ASWA, the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators, for their tireless commitment to being co-chairs for many, many years, and then helping out today. So thank you both, getting the word out, and Deirdre for all the work behind the scenes. And we have a March 5th webinar recording. If you didn't have a chance to see Chuck Job a couple weeks ago, that was fantastic. And the last thing I'll say before we go to my speakers, who I cannot see yet, let's see. I can't see you yet. Let me go. I just wanted to say that, there you are. Okay, excellent. I should pin you. We really want you to think of questions, because this is supposed to be like an in-person panel. If you were at a conference and you were watching me interview Liz and Ray and Brad in person, we really want to hear your questions, because groundwater protection is unique, and it's a different kind of source water protection. So we really would love to hear from you directly. So Liz and Ray and Brad, I'm just going to give you a quick, I'm going to sort of intersperse their bio through the questions and through this piece here. But I just want to quickly just give you a little background, and I'll personalize it. So I have worked with all three of these folks. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to work with Brad as long, but I have worked with Liz. We looked back at the dates, worked with Liz for 22 years, and I've worked with Ray since 2002. So it's really exciting to me that that I've had a chance to work so closely with each of them. So Liz has been in the water quality field for 25 years, and she's worked with different federal agencies. So Liz, I think of her as a ringer. She's worked at EPA headquarters. She's from the great state of Ohio, where my dad is from. And then she went to grad school in Vermont and decided to stay. And when I first met Liz, she was a source water protection specialist at Vermont Rural Water. And now Brad has that position, and Liz has was promoted to be executive director of the Vermont Rural Water Association. And she can tell you more when she introduces herself in a moment, but she also chairs what's called the WARN, and she can tell you what that is in a moment. And she was also elected to be a commissioner of the Champlain Water District. So Ray, I've also had a chance to work with personally, as I mentioned, for a really long time. And he's been the superintendent of the Brandon Fire District for many years, many decades. And you'll learn all about his career path. And he also serves as chair of the Vermont Rural Water Association. So if you don't know how that works, you will learn more about it. But rural water associations at the state level have representatives from the utilities. And Brad is a source water protection specialist, and he's been at Rural Water for 4 years. And he will be teaching you about how the Rural Water Source Protection Program is funded. But essentially, it's funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture Farm Service Agency. And he did research at a laboratory at the University of Vermont in Burlington, and he worked at the Waterbury, Vermont, for the water treatment for the town of Waterbury, Vermont, at the water utility. So he's a wastewater operator and also a drinking water treatment plant operator. So he has hands-on experience with both source water risk assessment, with field monitoring, regulatory compliance, and community outreach, which is where a lot of this work happens. So if each of you in that order, Liz, Ray, Brad, just want to quickly do a 1-minute intro of yourselves, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Kyra. I think you covered most of it for me. Like Kyra mentioned, I've been the executive director of Vermont Rural Water for about 7 years. And then I was source protection specialist here for about 15 years previous to that. I'm also currently the chair of Vermont WARN, which is the Water and Wastewater Agency Response Network, which is basically the mutual aid network for water and wastewater systems. There's one rural water in every state, and there's one WARN in every state as well. I'll pass it to Ray.
I'm Ray Cowner, Water Superintendent for Brandon Fire District Number 1, and then President of Vermont Rural Water Association. I've been Water Superintendent since 1997. Previously worked out of high school in the construction field and then in the plumbing industry until I became Water Superintendent. We're responsible for 3,600 people, 1,200 connections. I was sole operator until 2021. My source protection efforts began in like early 2000, I think is when I really started to look at it and looking at ways to protect our resources.
Thanks, Ray. Brad?
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Kyra. Yeah, my name is Brad Roy. I am the Source Water Protection Specialist with Vermont Rural Water Association. About 3 years prior to Ray becoming superintendent, I was born. So I've been in this field much shorter amount of time, but done a few things during my time. Like most people in this field, I completely fell into it by accident. I actually mowed lawns for an elderly couple across the street from the drinking water treatment plant that I would walk to after school. And the water plant pulled me in as a summertime help, and then the rest was kind of history. I took a little break, went to UVM, did some environmental research, worked on Lake Champlain, worked on a research vessel, putting pit tags and sea lamprey up in Canada, all kinds of weird stuff like that. And then found myself coming back to the water and wastewater industry, worked in the town of Waterbury, got my license for water and wastewater, and then 4 years ago or so moved over to Vermont Rural Water Association.
Fantastic. All right. So Liz has graciously agreed to give you an overview of what the Rural Water Association is. And sorry, I forgot before Liz does that, I just want to offer you some statistics about the state of Vermont's groundwater system. So Vermont is a rural state, and it is bisected by the Green Mountain National Forest. And the reason that's important is that in a state like Vermont, when there is a natural disaster, which happens unfortunately often, it's hard to get around the state. And some of our systems are literally isolated. So the importance of the relationships, and I'll tell you in a moment, the number of systems. So for community water systems that are groundwater based, we have 403 in the state of Vermont. So they're serving, the public water as a public water supplier. Then for non-transient, non-community, which are like schools, office buildings where the same people are going there every day. We have 252 of those. And then what we call transient non-community systems. Think of like the charming inns in the state of Vermont, or a motel, or a campground, or a rest area. We have 685 of those. And Brad will get into more details about how he supports those very small TNCs, transient non-community systems, but they have very different requirements. And for those of you who don't work full-time in the Safe Drinking Water Act, those tiers of systems changes dramatically the compliance and the what is tested for on a specific, at specific intervals. So I want to just give you the backdrop, and then, because we're not doing PowerPoints, I'm not showing you photos, but everyone sort of has a picture of Vermont in their head. And that's great, except when there's a blizzard or catastrophic rain events, which we've seen, both Tropical Storm Irene in 2011, when we literally had systems that were completely stranded, or Liz responding, she'll tell you more about that too. But during massive summer flooding in recent years. So that's one of the biggest struggles, is how isolated some of these systems are. And that's why it's really important for them to have a partner like the Vermont Rural Water Association, where she sort of is the umbrella and she can help these systems. And it's just been remarkable watching Liz and her staff do an incredible job helping their systems, especially during those critical incidents. So Liz, I'll turn it over to you just to give your own quick version of what is Vermont Rural Water, what is a Rural Water Association for those who aren't familiar with them.
Sure. So there are state affiliates in all 50 states that are part of the National Rural Water Association. And those state associations are nonprofits such as Vermont Rural Water, other types of associations. And those are of varying sizes. Staff, number of staff at each of those ranges, I think, from about 6 to maybe over, 80. I think in California, they have quite a few staff members. And the functions also vary quite a bit, but the basic functions of rural water associations are to provide technical assistance and often training to public drinking water and wastewater systems and the operators of those systems. So at Vermont Rural Water, we have 11 employees, including Brad, who's our one source protection specialist. Other states do have state-funded positions for source water as well. And I think, over the past 10 years, we've really been working on strengthening our partnerships with both federal and state agencies, as well as other nonprofit organizations. I would say, for example, USDA NRCS is one of the organizations that we've really been working with, not just in Vermont, but on a national level to strengthen our source protection efforts, specifically groundwater protection as well.
Great. I was muting myself so you don't hear my paper rustling. I do have, we did practice, so we have some questions I'm going to pose to each of the panelists, and they're going to educate you about how they do their work. So starting with Brad. So Brad's going to teach the audience about how, like, a day in the life of a source water protection specialist. And one of the things that he's going to talk about is, how they do their work, because it does seem like a bit of a black box when you hear like technical assistance. What does technical assistance mean? So Brad, if you could talk about a day in the life of a source water protection specialist at Rural Water.
Yeah, absolutely. So it could involve doing a webinar in front of a few dozen people for starters. But oftentimes what I'm looking at doing is just supporting these systems. So, we've got the 1,450 systems total in the state of Vermont. Any one of those systems can call up Rural Water and ask for assistance for just about anything, with a few caveats that we don't need to get into. But, as a source water protection specialist, my goal is to be mission focused on source water protection while also supporting the systems how they need to be supported. And ultimately, everything from operating the treatment plant to doing actual source water protection work to meeting compliance and regulations requirements, those are all source protection, because it's protecting the source of water both coming in and going out. So it can really range. These systems are rural. They typically have very few to almost no resources. Oftentimes we see volunteer operators, we see older retired operators, maybe people who aren't as familiar with technology. That can be a big part of working on rural water systems in the state of Vermont. A lot of what we have mandated by the state of Vermont it includes IT, right? You have to submit stuff online, you have to create maps, all these types of things that a big portion of our operators are not always comfortable with. So that can be a whole portion of the job in and of itself. Increasing compliance requirements is another thing. It doesn't get easier to run a water treatment plant. So trying to make sure systems are comfortable with what they have to achieve and prove that their water is safe is another big part of it. Some of the actual technical assistance umbrella activities are things like down well camera inspections, looking into people's wells to see what the condition of the casing is, whether there's infiltration, whether there's really turbid water, chemicals that are doing something funky. That's something that we do a lot of, as well as just really any sort of assistance with operations or troubleshooting problems, really anything from all of those different realms. And then the last big thing that I work on is source protection plans. Vermont requires written source protection plans from about half of our systems, so the community and the NTNC systems. So there's about 650 systems that have to have a plan and update that plan every 3 years. So oftentimes they come to Vermont Rural Water for assistance with that, and it means that my phone rings pretty frequently. So if I have an open day on my calendar, there's a good chance that a site visit gets penciled in before I make it to that open day.
Thanks, Brad. That's really helpful. And I want to pause for a moment and let you all absorb what one of the things he said, which I observed firsthand when I was working in, we had state units when I first started in this role. So I only worked in Vermont for the first 7 years that I did source water protection. So I spent about a week on average every month in the state of Vermont. So I probably know Vermont's drinking water source water protection program better than any other state that I work with because of that. So just imagine for a moment what Brad just said, which is most of these rural systems are so small that they have a volunteer operator. So that's someone who literally goes to the well house, either takes samples themselves or they have what's called a contract operator. We have, all these different variations, but as you know, or as you came here to learn, protecting groundwater is so different than a big surface water system. And I remember the first time I went to Brandon and visited Ray, and we drove out to a rural part of, it's a pretty rural town, Brandon, Vermont, but we drove out to the edge of town and we went in the middle of a farm field and he showed me a well house. And I was like, well, wait, there's a farm already. And I was like, wow, this is challenging. And so that was well over 20 years ago, Ray. So, the operators teach me a lot too. So the next question is for Ray. And as I mentioned, I've worked with you since 2002, and I have watched with such great admiration and awe you do this work of source water protection. I watched you win the award for medium-sized system from the American Water Works Association. And I wanted to ask and have you share with the audience what keeps you motivated, and how could other small and medium-sized systems that are either on the call today or partners who are on the call could, sort of share your inspiration with others.
So the first part, Kyra, you don't know about is the well that I showed you. I actually lived when I was a teenager about 1,500 feet from that well. And it didn't realize the importance of source protection then, but I just knew that was back in 1978 and just knew that we had good tasting water. Never correlated with me like where it came from, and never really concerned myself with it until I got my job, and then started looking at source protection and our current source protection plan, which met the bare elements of a source protection plan, very crude at least, and I just saw the value in that and the need to protect. And I want my kids and my grandchildren to be able to enjoy that same resource that we have. Because in Brandon, we're kind of unique in that we don't do any kind of treatment to our water. We just have standby disinfection. That for a community of almost 4,000 people is very rare, I would say. And so it became very, very interested, did a lot of research on source protection, trying to learn about Brandon and learn about geology and how it all works. Just became a passion of mine and something I worked on the side of doing my normal day-to-day operations of the water system. So to do that, there certainly takes a commitment of time. But one thing I will say is there are a lot of resources out there today that can help you in your source protection efforts. And just reach out to these organizations, because I was never aware of them back in 2000. I'm not even sure, maybe they existed and just I wasn't aware. I didn't dig deep enough. My computer didn't work that well. But it has been a passion for me, and I continue to work on it to this day.
Thank you. And, I just want to also emphasize the image of having rural water and a superintendent sitting shoulder to shoulder, because that's how this work is done, in my opinion. Liz builds relationships with her superintendents, her operators, so that when they need her for advice, or Brad or any of the staff, technical assistants, they feel that they can trust her, and they feel that she has their back. She will go to bat for them. She'll go to Washington and lobby for them, and she understands them. So I think everything we do in source water protection is built on relationship building, and it's an art, not a science, in my observation, doing this for 25 years. So Liz, to that end, I've worked with you since 2004. We used to go to groundwater coordinating committee meetings together, and I think our first meeting started over apple crisp at an inn in Vermont. So I knew I liked her from the beginning. So if you were advising other states about how to improve their groundwater protection efforts, what advice would you offer to other states?
Sure. I think the overall question is figuring out, how do you get people to care about groundwater specifically in your state? And every state's going to be different in that respect. I think it might be a little bit more of a challenge in certain ways in the Northeast. Water appears to be plentiful. It seems to be plentiful. We've had multiple floods in recent years. But I think, this past summer was pretty eye-opening for a lot of folks. We had one of the most severe droughts in Vermont that we've had in recent history. And part of that was people realizing, oh, wait, even, not just private wells, but, a lot of our groundwater sources we're running low, we're running dry. We had a lot of operators call us. They had never seen this issue before. We had a lot of press interested in the drought and what the impacts were on public and private drinking water wells. And the State Drought Task Force was reactivated this summer, which was a great resource and allowed a lot of different agencies and groups to come together that don't typically work together and really brainstorm some of the challenges that we were seeing. I just give one example of a specific challenge that we were dealing with, which was in the press. It was saying that public water systems, community water systems were having water available to private well owners, and that some systems had actually cut off access to that water. So we discussed that within the Drought Task Force and put out some press releases and worked with the Department of Health and Department of Environmental Conservation and Vermont Emergency Management to provide kind of protocols and suggestions for, if you do want to provide water and you have enough water with your public system, you're welcome to do that, but let's do it in a safe manner and be aware of containers that are being filled and that type of thing. And I think maybe the other issue, at least in Vermont, that's really grown interest in groundwater in recent years has been PFAS contamination. We had a large industrial contamination site in Bennington, Vermont. And then in 2019 and 2020, the state legislature passed some pretty strict new regulations for the state, and where every public drinking water system had to test for PFAS, and communicate with their customers about those issues. So that's definitely been eye-opening for a lot of people, and for better or for worse, has really brought more attention to groundwater in the state. In other states, it could be working with the state geologist to look at maybe naturally occurring contaminants. Arsenic in Vermont, we have arsenic, we have uranium. Those have been issues that maybe town planners have gotten interested in, or regional planning associations, and working with the state geologist to create new maps of those contaminants. In 2008, groundwater was a new act was passed that groundwater is now a public trust resource. Again, what are the issues that are going to resonate with people in your state, and have them be interested in groundwater planning, groundwater management, sustainability of groundwater. It's going to be different in every case, but just kind of keep your eyes and ears to the ground, no pun intended, to see what kind of those hot button issues are.
Great, thanks. And since we're about at the halfway point, I just wanted to tell everyone we have prepared questions that bring us to about 12:45. And I'm really hoping people start thinking about questions you want to ask the panelists. We have more questions I can ask them, but we really do hope that this will be a chance for you to ask the experts more about, the questions you might have in the back of your mind. And I noticed one of our colleagues we have several colleagues from Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation on the line. And one of them is Aaron Stewart, who helps coordinate what I had referred to earlier. It's called the Groundwater Coordinating Committee. And Liz, I don't know if you remember the statistic, but we actually looked it up at our last meeting. So I've been attending those Groundwater Coordinating Committee meetings for, 25 years. And I think that what's really unique about Vermont is that for about 40 years, all these different partners have been meeting together. So it's almost like a source water collaborative has existed in Vermont for about 40 years. So I just want to emphasize that as something other states, if you are really interested in groundwater protection, we have a great example in Vermont. It's the only one that I'm aware of in the country that has a formal groundwater coordinating committee that meets regularly, now has subgroups, and has great facilitation, and just a place for everybody to come together, whether you're a well driller or you're a state agency or a federal agency or the Vermont Department of Transportation. Like, how can we protect groundwater in the state of Vermont? And Vermont is so fortunate, but they work hard at it too. So my next question is for Brad. And Brad, I was hoping you could tell everyone, because you have this unique perspective, unique vantage point. You've worked at a water utility, and when we were doing our practice for this webinar, I was like, oh, Waterbury, which is where the state offices used to be until they were flooded in Tropical Storm Irene and forced to move because the offices were destroyed. Waterbury, Vermont, I always thought of as having a surface water source. And Brad corrected me or pointed out to me that not only does Waterbury, Vermont, where he worked, have a surface water source, they have a groundwater, they have wells, and they have groundwater under the direct influence, which we call GWEDI. So how is it different, Brad, running a utility versus providing technical assistance to small rural systems?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is when you're running one utility, you have all the things in that utility that keep you up at night. When you provide technical assistance to 1,400 systems, you've got 1,400 systems that have issues that keep you up at night. It's a little bit of a different perspective, but when you're focused on one utility, like take Waterbury, for example, they are listed, I think, at serving 6,000 people, and there's 2 full-time operators when I was working there. So those people, those operators are wearing a lot of hats, as most operators do. that was a relatively well-funded system. There's a lot of systems that are in worse shape employee-wise and staff-wise than that. So on any given day, you might be, working between plant maintenance and collection and distribution system work, compliance with regulations, customer service, plowing roads. You might be painting lines on the soccer fields if it's a small enough community. I've been there and done that. So you've got, 20 tasks that you go into work that you need to accomplish that day, and you typically leave with about 80 left on your list. And putting source water protection on that list often falls below that 80th task. It just is hard to prioritize. Providing technical assistance from the Vermont Rural Water standpoint is definitely different, because I think, like I mentioned, it's more mission focused. You're assisting these plants with the core mission of working on source water protection. And that changes things a little bit, but like I mentioned, that task can take a lot of different forms. It's going to be unique to each system. One system may need help with navigating relations with a landowner or managing forestry, while another system might have a contamination problem. Fuel spilled right next to the wellhead. We went through that last year. So there's so many different things that could happen, but what's really rewarding and what's cool about working with rural water is that we know source water protection pays dividends down the line in reducing treatment costs and reducing compliance issues and things like that. So the way that I try to look at it is I'm able to take taxpayer money that's granted through the USDA, FSA, through the National Rural Water Association, and then ultimately down to me to manage, and leverage that money to pay dividends for the general population in the future. So, all these tasks are intended to increase source water quality, to maintain good source water for these systems, and to keep them in compliance. So there are two different ways of looking at the same image, basically. But I enjoy being able to bring funds and bring technical expertise to systems that probably don't have the resources and don't have the time to work on those issues by themselves. So it helps prioritize those for the systems, and it gives them the resources they need to actually make a difference.
Brad, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. We were talking about maple sugaring in Vermont because it's maple sugar season. And Brad told me this story during our planning call, how you called up, it was a school system, right? A NTNC. And I think it started with, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not able to provide you technical assistance." And then what happened?
Yeah, then you kind of hear the story and you make a connection and you talk about sugaring for 20 or 30 minutes. And I'm going to be going down there in a couple of weeks.
So again,
but
it's
tough because there's so many of these little systems that need help, and there's only one source water person in the state of Vermont through rural water. We have state source water people, but I'm the only one at Vermont Rural Water. So it is tricky navigating on who you help and who you have to kind of push out to do things on their own sometimes.
And that was a school. So we always have soft spots for our school systems.
Yeah.
Okay, Ray, I was going to ask you if you could talk about the specific steps that you have taken in Brandon, Vermont. And while he's getting ready to answer, I want to just orient you, because we don't have slides. Brandon, Vermont is so beautiful, and it's located to the west is the Lake Champlain, and to the east is the Green Mountain National Forest. And it's just spectacularly beautiful, and it's one of the many towns that people flock to because it's so pretty. And so if you could just talk about ordinances or the steps you've taken to what I call hardwire groundwater protection in the town of Brandon, Vermont, which is so different than what a lot of other towns have been able to accomplish.
Okay, so before I started, long before I started in the early 80s, the wells, an aquifer protection area was established for the current wells that the fire district had as part of the original source protection plan. Nothing else was done until I came on board, and then I started, I reached out to the drinking water division about source protection. And that's when I was led to EPA and learned about the sole source aquifer petition, which is a federal petition for source protection. And worked with the town of Brandon, because we are separate from the town government, being a fire district. A lot of times we are the forgotten one, and just needed to, I reached out to them about source protection, and through our work, we created a overlay in our zoning districts for an aquifer, and came up with what would be conforming and non-conforming conditional uses. So there's a lot of work that went into that. And agricultural uses was part of that. And 2004, I reached out to Vermont Geological Survey and worked with them on identifying wells within Brandon. That was my first connection with them. That led to petitioning and partnering with VGS on the state map program, which is mapping the superficial geology of Brandon and groundwater resources. Had a connection. My connection with EPA continued when did a hydraulic investigation of hydraulic connection between our wells and the Neshabie River, which is in our aquifer. Also did work with EPA and VGS on a geophysical survey on McConnell Road for a potential future water supply. Worked with the Groundwater Coordinating Committee on establishing procedures for petition for Class 2 groundwater, which did not exist. I actually had to formally request them to come up with the criteria, and that took a period of time. And then we were approved for Class 2 groundwater in 2012. And my goal is to finalize the sole source aquifer petition and get that approved, and just continue my source protection efforts.
Thanks, Ray. I have told Ray this story many times. I was on vacation in Brandon, Vermont, in a neighboring town about 10 years ago, not long after they received what's called Class 2 groundwater designation. And the state of Vermont is all default Class 3. If you have a Superfund site or state-led hazardous waste site, you can be downgraded to a Class 4 because of the contamination. And then, as Ray said, he worked really hard to become the first and only groundwater system in the state of Vermont to receive this higher Class 2 designation. So they have a lovely French restaurant in Brandon, Vermont. And I was sort of baiting the server, and I said, "Oh, I heard you have great water here." And she said, "Oh, yes, Class A or Grade A." And I just was so excited to think that, that people that live in the town know how great their water is, and that it's the best in the state, essentially, because they're the only ones with this higher designation. So the pride that you can instill in your community and economic development opportunities for recruiting businesses because you have such great water is, I don't think you can measure that or quantify it, but it's very powerful. And it also helps the community feel proud about their water supply. So
I think most people in Vermont use the same system as grading maple syrup for everything, and that's probably where that came from.
I think you're right. I got an A. Yeah. So Liz, if you could just briefly describe your role, and just by the way, I'm thinking of so many things I want to put in the chat, but I'm so terrified that if I start putting stuff in the chat as if I'm participating in the webinar, not facilitating it, then somehow I will either end the webinar or accidentally, um, end the webinar for myself. So I'm thinking maybe I will take on this role of trying to create a little summary, like one pager of resources that I could provide to the participants, because there's so many things I want to tell you about in the chat, but I'm facilitating, so that would be dangerous. So Liz, if you could just provide a little more information about your executive director role and how it relates to achieving groundwater protection. And one of the things she and I talked about in the preparation for this was that a lot of these are not just science or engineering skills that we learn through our, training, but these are soft skills too. And Liz is one of the best in the business, in my opinion.
Well, right now, the current hot topic in our state legislature is housing. So I've been spending quite a bit of time there. And I think one of the bigger challenges in discussing groundwater and housing and development in Vermont with state officials and local officials is that they don't understand what capacity is. And that capacity is just not, it's more than just like, does the pipe run down the road, or, does a water or wastewater system exist in that community? There's a lot of different types of capacity, and groundwater being, one of the primary types of capacity, that we have enough source water available to run our system and to support any new development that's happening. So, they're always shocked when I have numerous examples of towns that had to have development moratoriums because they did not have enough groundwater. And in some cases, they couldn't even find more groundwater. It wasn't just, oh, let's just drill another well, let's find another source. There are some aquifers that are contaminated, some aquifers that are running dry. And I think it's just really shocking to people. And I think it's just having that conversation over and over and over. And sometimes I feel like a broken record, but there's always constantly new folks being elected to the state legislature. There's constantly new town select boards, constantly new town planners, regional planners, new folks at state agencies. And it's just, we have to keep repeating ourselves and work on the communication about some of these topics because it's out of sight, out of mind. But right now is the time to be having these conversations. And I'm very grateful to the Groundwater Coordinating Committee for bringing, this large group of people together for so many decades and having those people care so much about groundwater. And they've been working very hard to do a lot of education, both on the state level and the local level. And I get to be a part of that. So it's just, my job is a lot of communication and a lot of collaboration. And we're very lucky in Vermont that, I feel like I'm, can be friends with a lot of these folks at the state agencies and at other organizations. And we all have similar goals. We kind of come at it from a different angle, but we definitely all work together to help protect our groundwater and make it sustainable for our future.
Thanks, Liz. That's so helpful. And, Liz has to, put on her boots and show up when there is a catastrophic precipitation event and try to get a wastewater system back online in July with no power, no cell phone service is a huge issue in the state of Vermont, which always complicates things on a good day. And then when you have, a natural disaster, then it just becomes even more problematic. So, and then Liz has to testify in the Vermont state legislature. And then, as I mentioned, she goes to DC and she works on behalf of her state and Rural Water Association to help ensure that our congressional staff are also aware of the importance of supporting rural water systems. So Liz has to be like 8 different people on any given day, which is just so. I respect you so much, Liz, all of you. So now we have, I saw a couple of questions in the chat. I saw one from Sarita, and I think there was one before that. Let's see. Okay, so there were some comments, and
there's
There's one from
The question from
BJ
Sonia.
Elengo. I'm probably saying pronouncing that wrong, but question for Ray. Do you see that one? Do you want me to read
Yeah,
it?
but before that, I think, let's see. I see the one from Sarita that came in first, unless,
I think there's
I'm gonna
one
start
in the
with Sarita,
Q&A
but-
and probably some in the chat.
oh, got it. Okay. Well, I'll start with Sarita, who is from NUIPIC, our New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission. What do you think small rural water systems can do to mitigate high-risk land uses within their impact area? She said, I'm thinking high uses could include septic systems, fuel tanks, pesticides, etc. So if any of you want to take that one, and then we'll go back to the Q&A question, which I didn't see. Sylvia, thanks.
I'm happy to jump in, and Liz can feel free to add as well. But that can be really challenging. I think one of the things that we mentioned to a lot of systems is something like a zoning overlay district is a really powerful tool. If the town level is willing to implement a zoning overlay that specifically addresses source water concerns, that's a really powerful way to prevent new development and things like that. In Vermont, we have a tremendous amount of on-site septic systems in the state of Vermont. I think we're the highest in the country, but correct me if I'm wrong on that. Working and reaching out to landowners to make sure that those systems are maintained properly, that they understand the frequency of pumping that should be happening, that putting certain things down the drain can impact water quality. If you're going to Scotch guard all your camping gear and then rinse the toad out, please don't dump that on the ground or dump it down the sink into your septic system. We see that a lot with things like schools too, with old floor wax and stuff like that. So just in a small state, I think reaching out to the individuals that could potentially cause the issue is probably priority number one. And then on a broader scale, zoning and townwide planning, things like that can be really effective. And feel free to jump in if Liz or Ray have anything to add.
I'd like to add, as far as an example for us is a conditional use we have is for furniture manufacturing because it already existed within the aquifer. And by communicating with those manufacturers, they change their application of finishes and went to a water-based material, which was much safer and less harmful to the environment. So it's just like if you reach out and educate, I just think that's so important.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Ray, about going to the manufacturer. I think that's more common with the water systems, or perhaps the folks like Brad who can, knock on the door and say, hey, did you know you're in a source water protection area or groundwater protection area? I'm going to read this other question, and then if you can multitask, Liz and Brad, I just realized that it would be great if people could have your contact information. Ray also, but I think you're using Liz's computer. But would you guys be willing, sorry to put you on the spot, if we included your email, and your probably email is best or whatever you prefer, because I think it'd be great for people to be able to reach out to you if they have any follow-up questions that they didn't want to ask the whole group. But I'm going to read the last.
We could
Thanks,
post
Sarita.
the link to our page in the chat. I'll put that in.
Okay, great. And then if you can include Ray's contact information, Liz, that'd be great. Okay, VJ Alongo wrote in the Q&A, Ray, thank you for your long service in the water industry. In terms of source water protection, how, quote, what is important has changed over time. For example, when you started out, there might have been one or two things that were the main focus. How did that one or two important things change over time?
Oh, it changes as the world has changed, because now we talk about PFAS, which was never a part of anything that was involved in. We have an abundant water source, and like Liz mentioned about the drought last year, not to the fact that we were short on water, but the groundwater supplies were depleted. It is an actual thing. So now we're talking about coming up with a conservation policy that I never considered doing before. We're having more wildfires, and I don't know what, that's can be a negative impact. Again, it's not anything, when I originally started, that I even thought I would be thinking about planning for today.
Yeah, Ray, that was about 10 years ago when we met with the U.S. Forest Service. I remember the forest supervisor brought that up to us and we said, we would never have a wildfire in the state of Vermont. And now we can have a wildfire in the state of Vermont. So we decided to have like just closing comments from everyone so that you can just hear any parting thoughts of things that folks didn't have a chance to say. I'll start by saying that I just put one link in the chat without disconnecting myself, because there's a great article about Ray and what a hero he is. And then I also, after the meeting, I will put into this resource list. One of the things I worked on 20 years ago was an update to this great document that Vermont DEC had created, I think originally in 1984. It's called An Ounce of Prevention. And, ounce of prevention, it was a groundwater protection guide for local officials. And one of the things we included in there is a model groundwater ordinance. So we worked with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. So that it would be something that people could sort of plug and chug, so they could take this model ordinance that the attorneys there had worked on. So we have that electronically, and it's a great little document. We printed 6,000 copies, and it always went like hotcakes at the rural water meetings because it just has a lot of great information. And even though it's a bit outdated, it's still very relevant. So I'll go in order again. So Liz, Ray, Brad, if you just want to close us out with any last thoughts, and thank you for putting the contact information in the chat. Does that include Ray's contact information too, though, or just Liz and Brad?
I'm not sure. I'll take a look after.
Okay.
I guess my closing thought is just, don't hesitate to reach out to, it's a small world. And those of us who've worked in source protection, love to talk shop, right? And we're always excited, it doesn't matter who it is. It could just be a, town resident who's just curious about, a new gas station or something going into town. It doesn't matter what the question is, just, please go ahead and reach out. And rural water typically has the relationships, like Kyra mentioned, with the systems and has built trust with those systems over many decades. And we can also have those tough conversations sometimes. If there's concerns, we can have those conversations with landowners, with farmers, with foresters, whoever those folks may be. But yeah, just start with reaching out and we can provide more resources.
Thanks, Liz. Ray, I didn't put your cell phone number, but I was able to cut and paste your
No, I just wanted to follow up what Liz said. I mean, I would make myself available to talk to anybody about any of my personal experiences in the water industry, not just source protection, because I have experienced a lot of different, I'll call it unique situations. And I think the biggest thing is I can say is educate, but also be patient, because we tend to be thick-headed at times and it takes a while for it to sink in. The last thing, and I think it's the most important as far as source protection, please be proactive so you don't have to be reactive.
So true. Thanks, Ray. Brad?
Yeah, I would follow the same vein. Take what you're doing for source protection right now and try to increase it a little bit. If you're not doing anything, there's about 250 working days in a year. Schedule a 4-hour block and pick something. You're going to make more progress than if you didn't. That's a great place to start. The other thing that I would add is find something that you're passionate about and, your off time, what do you like to do? And you can probably figure out a way to implement that as a source protection project. So think about it as a way to make it fun, make it something you want to do, take it in small little bites. And if you don't know where to start, honestly, your state's source water protection specialist, if they have one that you can get to your facility, they're the best place to start. They've seen it and done it and have all the contacts. So call them up, shoot them an email, and they'll probably drive out and meet with you and give you all the ideas that you could ever want.
Thank you all so much. A big round of applause for everybody. And I would challenge anybody on this call to try to replicate this in your state. Maybe do a webinar in your state for groundwater protection and, ask folks doing groundwater protection in your state to do something like this, because I think because this work that we do is an art, not a science, I think a big part of what we do is storytelling, and it's much easier to absorb everything that we just talked about in a conversation than it is on a PowerPoint, because I actually really enjoyed this model, this platform, and thank you for being part of this experiment. And I think we'll close it out, and you have everybody's contact information. I'll put mine in there too. And if you have any questions, please follow up with any of us. And Sylvia Malm from the Groundwater Protection Council, we'd love to hear your thoughts for our groundwater discussion group. And please get involved. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.